Somewhere in an airport right now, a passenger is standing at security wondering why their boarding pass suddenly won't scan, why their bag just got pulled for the third flight in a row, or why the officer waving them through seems to know something they don't. Most of what happens at a TSA checkpoint isn't random, even when it's designed to feel that way. There's an algorithm quietly deciding who gets extra scrutiny before you even step foot in the terminal. There's a federal program most Americans have never heard of that can follow you onto your flight. And there's a fix, buried in government paperwork, for the one thing that ruins more trips than almost anything else at the airport. None of this is a conspiracy theory. It's documented, reported, and in some cases confirmed by TSA itself, sitting in plain sight for anyone who bothers to look for it. Most travelers fly their entire lives without ever learning any of this, which is exactly why the ones who do know it move through the airport with a completely different level of confidence. Let's start with the mystery every frequent flyer eventually runs into. Secret 1. Your boarding pass can flag you before you even leave home. Most travelers assume airport screening starts the moment they walk up to the checkpoint. In reality, it starts the moment you book your ticket. Every reservation gets run through a system called Secure Flight, and if certain patterns show up, your boarding pass prints with 4 letters that make frequent flyers groan. SSSS, standing for Secondary Security Screening Selection. Once you see it, you're locked into a longer, more invasive process. Bag searches by hand, pat-downs, and sometimes swabs of your electronics to check for explosive residue. What actually triggers it isn't published anywhere official, which is exactly why it feels so unpredictable. Reported patterns include booking a one-way ticket, paying for a flight in cash, last-minute bookings, or having a name that closely resembles someone on a security list. Some travelers have also noticed it correlates with unusual international routing, flying into one city and departing from another, for instance. Though TSA has never confirmed a definitive checklist, which only adds to the sense of mystery around the whole process. Here's the detail that surprises people most. Even TSA PreCheck doesn't protect you from it. If Secure Flight flags your itinerary, your PreCheck status gets overridden for that specific trip, and you're funneled into standard or enhanced screening instead, sometimes losing your ability to check in online entirely until you show up at the counter in person. Getting it once is usually nothing to worry about. Getting it repeatedly is a different story, and that's exactly the mystery we're solving next. Secret 2. There's an actual fix for getting flagged every single time. If SSSS shows up on your boarding pass once, it's probably a random algorithmic fluke. If it shows up on every single trip, something more specific is happening, and there's a real process for dealing with it that most travelers never learn about until they're desperate. The Department of Homeland Security runs a program called DHS TRIP, the Traveler Redress Inquiry Program, designed specifically for people who keep getting misidentified or repeatedly flagged for reasons that likely have nothing to do with them personally, often because their name closely matches someone else's on a watch list. Applying gets you something called a redress number, which you can then add to your airline profile and future bookings. It's not an instant fix. Processing can take weeks, and DHS doesn't guarantee it resolves every case, since some flags are tied to routing patterns rather than identity confusion. But for travelers stuck in a cycle of extra pat-downs and separated luggage every time they fly, it's the difference between accepting a permanent inconvenience and actually doing something about it. Business travelers who fly constantly on short notice, and anyone with a common name that happens to overlap with someone flagged on a federal list, are disproportionately likely to benefit from going through this process. Most people never find out this program exists because TSA doesn't exactly advertise it at the checkpoint. You're far more likely to hear about it from a frustrated traveler's blog post than from an airport employee, buried somewhere behind the standard rules everyone already knows. And speaking of things that quietly get you pulled aside, your snacks might be doing more damage than your ID ever could. Secret 3. Your lunch could be slowing down the entire line. Ask any TSA officer what actually causes the most unnecessary bag searches, and you might be surprised how often the answer has nothing to do with liquids or electronics. It's food. Dense, tightly packed items scan poorly on X-ray machines because they don't let light and detail through the way looser objects do. Peanut butter, blocks of cheese, thick yogurt, and protein powders are frequent offenders, and because some of these are considered gels or pastes rather than solids, they can also get pulled under the standard 3.4-ounce liquid rule, even though most travelers would never think to check the size of their peanut butter jar before a flight. Baby formula and powders like protein mix or creatine cause similar confusion, triggering additional screenings simply because the machine can't get a clean read, and officers then have to manually confirm what's actually inside before clearing the bag. For families flying with young kids, this can be an especially frustrating experience. A diaper bag packed with formula, baby food pouches, and snacks checks almost every box that trips up an X-ray machine simultaneously, turning what should be a quick pass through the line into a 5-minute delay while an officer works through each item individually. It's not just food either. Thick books, aluminum foil, and leaded glass can all interfere with the X-ray image in ways that force an officer to open your bag and look by hand, since dense or reflective materials essentially create a shadow the scanner can't see through cleanly. None of these items are actually prohibited, they're just visually confusing to the machine, and a confused machine means a manual search, which slows down not just your screening but everyone waiting behind you in line. If you're someone who packs snacks for a long flight, the fix is simple. Keep dense items loose and easy to access rather than buried at the bottom of your bag, and don't be shocked if your protein bars or block of cheddar get a second look even though they're perfectly legal to bring. Frequent flyers who travel with the same packed lunch trip after trip often don't even realize their food is the reason they keep getting flagged, because the connection isn't obvious unless someone actually explains it to them. But food isn't the only unexpected trigger, sometimes it's what you're wearing. Secret 4. Your outfit might be setting off the scanner. Here's one that genuinely surprises most travelers. Certain clothing choices reliably trigger a body scanner alarm, and it has nothing to do with anything actually dangerous. According to a supervisory TSA officer who's worked checkpoints for nearly 2 decades, sequin tops and blouses commonly alarm the millimeter wave scanners most airports now use, simply because of the metallic threading woven through the fabric. Jeans with rhinestone detailing on the back pockets cause the exact same problem. In both cases, the scanner isn't identifying a specific threat. It's just detecting metal in a spot where the algorithm can't immediately rule out something concerning, which means an automatic follow-up pat-down in that area. The same officer noted this happens frequently enough that experienced checkpoint staff can often predict exactly where the alarm will trigger just by looking at a passenger's outfit before they even step into the scanner. This is a genuinely easy trap to fall into, especially for travelers dressing up for a flight to a special event, wedding or vacation. Nobody thinks twice about a rhinestone-studded outfit until they're standing with their arms raised at the checkpoint, confused about what set off the alarm while the line behind them quietly grows. It's an ironic little wrinkle in airport security. The more effort someone puts into looking put together for travel day, the more likely they are to accidentally trigger the exact process they were trying to avoid by dressing nicely in the first place. If you're wearing anything with metallic thread, sequins, studs, or heavy embellishment, budget a little extra time because that follow-up screening isn't optional once the scanner flags it. Seasoned travelers who fly for work in structured, embellishment-free outfits rarely run into this at all, which is part of why the issue catches occasional or first-time flyers so consistently off guard. And while we're talking about things that trip people up unnecessarily, there's a liquid loophole that almost nobody actually uses. Secret 5. Frozen liquids can skip the 3-to-1-1 rule entirely. Everyone knows the 3-to-1-1 liquid rule by now. Containers under 3.4 ounces, all packed into a single quart-sized bag. What a lot of travelers don't know is that there's a built-in exception hiding in plain sight. TSA has confirmed that liquids frozen solid at the time of screening aren't subject to the standard 3-to-1-1 restriction at all. That means a frozen water bottle, a solid ice pack, or even certain frozen foods can travel through security without counting against your liquid allowance, as long as they're actually frozen solid when they reach the X-ray belt, not just cold or slushy. This is a genuinely useful trick for parents traveling with baby food, anyone bringing homemade meals through security, or travelers who hate paying airport prices for bottled water and would rather freeze one at home the night before boarding. It also comes in handy for anyone flying with items like frozen breast milk or homemade freezer meals for a family member, situations that would otherwise require complicated documentation or explanation at the checkpoint. The catch is timing. If your item has started to melt even slightly by the time you reach the checkpoint, an officer can determine it no longer qualifies as solid, and it gets treated like any other liquid, subject to the full 3.4-ounce limit. If you're planning to use this trick, freeze it as close to departure as realistically possible, and don't count on a long security line working in your favor. A fully frozen bottle at check-in can easily turn slushy by the time you actually reach the X-ray belt during a busy travel period. Not every hidden option at the airport is about what's in your bag, though. Some of them are about who you are and what kind of help you might need. Secret 6. There's a program built specifically for travelers who need extra help. If you've ever watched someone with a disability, a medical condition, or significant anxiety struggle through a security checkpoint, you've probably wondered whether there's a better way. There is, and most people have never heard of it. TSA Cares is a dedicated program that lets travelers request assistance before they ever arrive at the airport. That can include a passenger support specialist who walks a traveler through the entire screening process, additional time and explanation for people with cognitive or developmental conditions, or accommodations for medical devices, mobility equipment, and other needs that don't fit neatly into a standard checkpoint routine. Requests are typically made by calling ahead, ideally at least 72 hours before a flight. This program exists because standard airport security wasn't originally built with every kind of traveler in mind, and TSA has spent years trying to close that gap. Families flying with a child on the autism spectrum, veterans with visible or invisible injuries, and elderly travelers navigating security for the first time in years have all used this service to turn what used to be a stressful, confusing process into something far more manageable. Even something as simple as a passenger support specialist walking alongside a nervous first-time flyer, explaining each step before it happens, can turn what felt like an intimidating gauntlet into something genuinely calm. It's free, it's underused, and it's exactly the kind of thing that never comes up unless someone specifically points you toward it. There's no sign at the airport advertising it, and most gate agents won't mention it unless directly asked. If you or someone you're traveling with has ever dreaded the checkpoint because of a medical condition, disability, or anxiety around unpredictable processes, this is the single most useful secret on this entire list, and it costs nothing but a phone call placed a few days ahead of time. Speaking of things that quietly speed the process along, there's a checkpoint shortcut that's been hiding in plain sight for years. Secret 7. The dogs at the airport aren't just for show. Most travelers glance at the explosive detection dogs working near security lines and assume there's simply an extra layer of protection running in the background. In reality, those canine teams can directly change how quickly you get through the checkpoint. TSA maintains hundreds of these teams nationwide, trained to detect explosive odors on passengers and their belongings as they walk through the terminal, sometimes before travelers even reach the formal screening line. At several major airports, once a canine team has screened a section of the regular line, those passengers become eligible to move through an expedited process, keeping shoes and belts on and leaving laptops and small liquids packed, similar to the pre-check experience, even if they never enrolled in pre-check at all. It's worth noting this isn't guaranteed everywhere, and a 2020 government watchdog report raised concerns that some local TSA teams leaned on the dogs more to speed up lines than to maximize detection accuracy, which led to renewed emphasis on proper canine deployment. The report specifically flagged that some officials treated the dogs as a line management tool rather than the explosive detection resource they were trained for, a tension that continues to shape how canine teams are used at different airports depending on local leadership priorities. Still, if you notice a dog team working the line ahead of you, it's not just theater, it's an active part of how fast you're about to get through security, and getting sniffed by a working dog is often the fastest, least invasive form of screening available at any checkpoint. But even pre-check itself, the program millions of travelers pay for specifically to avoid uncertainty, comes with a catch most people don't realize until it happens to them. Secret 8. Pre-check doesn't actually guarantee anything. Millions of Americans pay for TSA pre-check specifically so they can stop worrying about screening surprises, shoes on, laptop in the bag, a shorter line, and a much more predictable experience. For the vast majority of trips, that's exactly what happens. But pre-check was never actually a promise, and the fine print matters more than most enrolled travelers realize. TSA has always reserved the right to apply randomized additional screening even to pre-check passengers, and secure flight can override pre-check entirely on a specific itinerary if something about that particular trip gets flagged. The same system responsible for the SSSS designation we covered earlier. That means a 5-year pre-check member with a spotless travel history can still occasionally get pulled for a standard walkthrough or a bag check, seemingly at random, on a program they specifically paid to avoid that exact outcome. It's a genuinely disorienting moment for a lot of travelers, since pre-check membership creates a reasonable expectation of consistency that the fine print never actually promised. This isn't a flaw unique to pre-check either. It reflects how TSA's entire security model is designed around unpredictability on purpose, since a fully predictable system would be far easier for anyone with bad intentions to plan around. Randomized checks, even for pre-vetted travelers, are part of what keeps the overall system harder to exploit, even if it occasionally means an inconvenient morning for someone who did everything right. The lesson here isn't that pre-check is a waste of money. For the overwhelming majority of flights, it dramatically speeds things up and remains one of the better travel investments available for anyone flying more than a handful of times a year. The lesson is that no membership, program, or status makes you fully exempt from screening variability, and travelers who build in zero buffer time because they assume pre-check is bulletproof are setting themselves up for an unpleasant surprise on the one day it doesn't work exactly as expected. Usually the one day they can least afford it, like a connection with a tight layover. And that brings us to the secret most travelers have genuinely never heard of at all. Secret 9. Some passengers are watched long after they clear security. Here's the one that tends to catch people off guard the most. Passing through the checkpoint isn't necessarily the end of the screening process for everyone. For a small number of travelers, it's just the beginning of a different kind. Since 2010, TSA has operated a program known as Quiet Skies, in which federal air marshals are assigned to secretly observe specific passengers during their flights, documenting behavior like fidgeting, extended eye contact, use of the restroom, or whether a passenger sleeps during the flight. Reporting on the program, based on internal TSA documents, found that on a typical day, somewhere between 40 and 50 travelers nationwide are selected for this kind of in-flight observation. And importantly, none of them are on any terrorist watch list or suspected of a specific crime. Selection is instead based on broader travel pattern analysis, particularly around international routes. TSA has defended the program publicly, stating its purpose is protecting passengers and crew rather than surveilling ordinary Americans, and stressing that observed travelers are never approached or detained as a result. Air marshals reportedly track details as specific as whether a passenger used the bathroom, spoke with other travelers, or possessed multiple mobile phones, a level of granular observation that feels closer to investigative surveillance than routine safety monitoring, which is exactly why the reporting on this program generated so much attention when it first surfaced. Still, government oversight reports have repeatedly questioned how effective the program actually is at identifying real threats, with one federal review specifically criticizing how TSA planned, implemented, and managed it, and outside security experts have pointed out there's little public evidence the program has ever directly prevented an attack. Most travelers will never be selected, and there's no way to know in advance if you have been. But the fact that a program like this exists at all, quietly running in the background of routine domestic flights, unconnected to any watch list or suspected crime, is exactly the kind of thing that doesn't show up in the safety briefing. Taken together, these 9 things reveal something simple. Airport security isn't just what you can see at the checkpoint. It's an algorithm deciding who gets flagged before you even arrive. A redress process most people never learn exists. A scanner that reacts to sequins as easily as smuggled items. A frozen liquid loophole hiding inside a rule everyone already knows. An assistance program built for travelers who need it most. Dog teams doing more than patrolling. A pre-check membership that isn't quite the guarantee it's marketed as, and a surveillance program running quietly in the background of ordinary flights. None of this should make anyone afraid to fly. If anything, understanding how the system actually works is the best way to move through it with less stress and fewer surprises. The travelers who arrive prepared, who understand why their peanut butter got flagged or why their sequin jacket triggered a pat-down, spend far less time frustrated and confused than the ones encountering all of this cold for the first time. Knowing these 9 things won't make you immune to a long line or a random selection, but it will make the process feel a lot less like something happening to you and a lot more like something you actually understand. Which of these secrets surprised you the most, and is there another hidden TSA policy you think deserves a spot on this list?